Okay, you guys should be seeing it now. Hopefully you can hear me. Let me know if you can hear me or not, please. Please use the Discord. I'll post the Discord in a comment in a moment. Should be live now. Hey, all right. So let me give it a minute here. Everybody get a chance to log in, and we will start the class. Okay, so this is going to be just a quick, maybe 30-minute, 45-minute one. Does it sound okay? I'm not right up to the mic right now, so it might be a little quiet, but just let me know as long as it's working and not stuttering and all that crap. Thank goodness. Just give it another minute or so, let people get in, and we'll start. I haven't quite got the chat figured out on Patreon, so we're going to have to do it through Discord here, which is probably much easier, and then the Patreon view. But you should be able to use comments in here. So let me see how quick it takes for these comments to show up under the video. So it looks like that works as well. So if one of you would, through the Patreon page there, just make a quick comment, and I want to see if it pops up live. Because the view on Patreon is delayed by maybe a minute or 30 seconds or so. I'm not sure how much. Yeah, I know. I'm going to do a special channel, but I had internet issues, and I had to switch to my old router because my Google Nest mesh network something's causing it to drop my bandwidth down by a third, and Google was on the phone with me this morning trying to figure it out. This works okay for now. So give a couple more, another minute or so here, and then we'll start, see who's coming in. Right now we've got 6 viewers now. Cool. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and start because the number of people that I wanted are here. So we will go ahead and get started. Let me know in the Discord if you can hear me. I posted it in the first comment on the Patreon page underneath the video here. So you should be able to see it. I'll go ahead and also post it again just to keep it on the top. So let me know in Discord how I sound, if you guys can all hear me well. Sounds perfect. All right. Okay, cool. So let's go ahead and get started. First thing I want to do is all you guys that are Patreon members and have supported me, even if it's just $1, like I said, it's not about the money for me. It's about being able to help you out. But I do need to be able to raise a little bit of funds to get this stuff to work. So here we go. Let's get started. For those of you guys that don't know me, my first name, I think you all do. It's Paul. And I've been doing Amiga work pretty much since the beginning. It was one of my first real main computers. I started with the 1000. My first Amiga 1000 I got was back in the middle of 1986, so just a little after it was released. And I've been an Amiga owner ever since, even through my career in the Navy. I was in the Navy for 21 years. That's where I learned most of my technical skills for repair and soldering and stuff like that. And that's where I stuck with the computer, and I love the Amiga, so I kept with it. And now I'm retired. I still work for the Navy as a civilian now, and my primary job is fixing naval missile systems on board cruisers, destroyers, both U.S. Navy and the world's Navy. A lot of you have seen my travel posts. So that is my background. That is why I am so slow at repairing your guys' stuff sometimes, because I get sent out to go fix something overseas and it takes me away, or I get sent to San Diego for a school or something. But again, that's why I try to be as upfront as I can before I say, yes, send me your stuff. And that's just what it is. So let's get started. So this first class is going to be the basics of what you need to get started. And as you can see on my workbench here, I set out a couple of things. These are basically just a little bit of what you need to get started with soldering. And the reason I have my weller out here, so this is a WES 51. It is a pretty basic weller soldering iron. This actually is all you really need. So to do repairs and to do some decent soldering, you're going to want a soldering iron that has a adjustable power temperature on it, like this. So this one goes from pretty low to nothing all the way up to 85. This is a really good soldering iron. You can find these on eBay used for less than $40 if you really look. And these things are amazing. I've had this thing for probably 20 years. So that's the first thing that you're going to need. The next thing you're obviously going to need is some solder. Now, soldering, for those of you that are in Europe, may be a little bit difficult to get leaded solder, but you honestly need to have leaded solder if you're going to be working on these vintage systems. If you don't, you're going to need to buy a soldering base station that is specifically made with its tips and its heat profiles to do ROMs or unleaded solder. Usually unleaded solder is green. It has a green color on the containers for it. So, and like all of your tools and parts usually have like a green color. The green that you see, this isn't solder, this is the thing, but the green that you see is usually the same color green here that's on these Kimtech wipes, and that denotes whether the roll of solder that you bought is leaded or unleaded. And the lead just basically helps it to flow a little bit easier. Now the solder that I like to use, my favorite brand, some of you have probably seen it on my website, www.ackle.com, that will have what you need to get started as well. I try to list things here. If a link doesn't work, just let me know and we'll get back to it. But the solder that I like to use is Kester. Now, Kester is some pretty good stuff. It is a little bit on the pricey side, but you'll notice on here that this says Kester leaded solder, and you notice I'm going into the microscope so you can kind of see a little bit better. And that's upside down, so there you go. So Kester leaded solder. This is a specific type that I enjoy using. Let me see if there's the actual model number on here. Anyways, it's listed on the website. So what you want to use is some pretty thin stuff. So I'll get the actual spool out. So here's the actual spool, so you guys can see exactly what it is here that I'm using. This is a 1 pound roll normally, and it is 0.015 inches is the diameter of this solder. The reason that I like to use small diameter of a solder is helps to solder smaller stuff, and it helps you to control how much solder you're getting on your board. So if you put too much solder down and it comes out too fast, you're going to have excess solder and it's just going to blob everywhere and make a mess. So you don't want that. You want to have just the right amount of solder, and one of the ways to control it is through that. Now the next thing you're obviously going to need is some solder braid. So solder braid is extremely important for getting up excess solder. If you watch some of my repair videos, you guys have probably seen me clean up boards and take caps off and then use the solder braid to remove it. So yes, the microscope is upside down-ish, sort of. I don't know. I'm hoping that it's not. But how's that? So let me know, does that look right or is that upside down? I don't know, man. Anyway, the microscope's upside down, so it should be right side up when you're looking at it like this. I don't know, it's looks good to me. But anyways, you want to make sure that you're using solder braid to remove solder. And the way that you use this is you put the iron right up on top of it. So if you're having your iron out and you're going to desolder something, so let's go ahead and I'll just pull a board out as an example. We'll get a small crappy little board to work with here. So we'll use this hard drive here as an example with a board on the back of it of soldering. So for solder braid, when you're cleaning up things, so if you'll notice on this hard drive here, this section right here has a bunch of solder on pads with nothing on it. So you just see bare solder. So what you would do is you would take your iron, it'd be on and heated up. You take a clean portion of the solder braid and you would put it over the top, and then you would just touch it through here, and it will actually absorb the solder into the solder braid. So that is one way for desoldering an item, and is one way just to clean up your pads. And you'll do that after you remove a component. You'll want the pads nice and clean. So that's where solder braid comes in from. It's made out of copper. It's nothing too fancy, but again, you get what you pay for in this stuff, so you don't want to buy the cheap Chinese stuff. And if you notice, I like Chemtronics. I have tons of this. So the brand that I use here, Chemtronics solder braid, gives you an example of what I use. Pretty straightforward. And these probably cost about $3 or $4 for a roll of it, and I get them in big giant spools of it. Okay, another very important item. So when you're soldering, you are going to need a good pair of tweezers. So tweezers that I prefer are here, and I should have them sponsor my videos, but I like the iFixit stuff. So the iFixit stuff here is fairly good, and you can see here in the webcam, I can show you a little bit better. So I use the iFixit, and this is a pretty nice little basic kit that you can get. You can get it directly from the iFixit website, and this comes with 3 different sets of tweezers, and a nice little storage bag here. So I'll lay them out here in the side. Don't pay attention to the microscope view. That's just there right now. If it would be easier to take it off, I would, but I kind of like to have a close-up view for you guys to be able to see. So these are anti-static. They're safe to use. So, and if you notice, you can see on the side here, it says ESD. So ESD safe means electrostatic discharge safe. So what that does is it prevents any kind of shock. You don't want to shock your components. And if you notice here, I have 3 different types. So we can get them close. Now this bent one that I have right here is the same as this bent one here. So I'm not going to take the cover off of this because it's one of my spares for a backup. And we'll just show you on this one because it's not an iFixit, but it's the exact same brand that they used. This is a Vetus. don't know if you can see that or not. And this one's got some serious miles on it. I probably had this one for 5 or 6 years. Now then, this is my number one set of tweezers that I use. And the reason I like it is because they're bent and it helps out. So if you look in here, I have this roll of capacitors, and these are 603. They're very, very tiny. So what this will do is you can pull out the capacitor. You'll notice I'll drop one on in spot here. So if you look in here, you can probably see it. I'm going to set it down into the middle there. It's super tiny. Obviously, you couldn't really do this with your fingers if you tried. So these tweezers come in handy for picking things up. So as you can see, just how small that sucker actually is. Let's see. I get in here and zoom it in. And it's probably not going to focus so well. But anyways, you're just going to have to trust me. This damn thing is small. It's small. So anyways, we'll set that down there. You can see it in the red square. This helps when you do it. And I wouldn't say I'm ambidextrous, but I'm pretty close, so it does help. So again, you would grab a pair of tweezers, put it down in here, gives you an example of how small it is. Solder your deal in place, and it just helps, as you can see. So tweezers are very, very important. I'm gonna sneeze. So again, pretty nice tweezer set from iFixit. These run about $10. Not too bad. Yeah, I'm sorry. Sneezing loud. Am I still live? You guys all still hear me? It's very quiet in this chat. Okay, cool. So tweezers. The next set of very important tools that you're going to need, and again, this is probably something I use every single day when I solder, is my side cutters. So your side cutters are used for trimming the leads off the end of a through-hole capacitor. So I will show you that here in a sec. So here is an example of a through-hole capacitor. You will notice it's, got its legs on it and goes through the board, which is why they call this a through-hole. So you have your two types. The little capacitor I showed you earlier was a surface mount. This is a through-hole. So a through-hole, basically, what you do is, here's a circuit board that uses through-hole components. You would take the leads in the spot that it would go into. They would go through the top like so. Just to give you an idea of how that works. And you solder through the bottom of the board. Once you solder these through, you take your side cutters and you cut them off flush with the board to clean them up. Pretty simple, but again, a must-have tool. You do not want to use, and the reason that I got these out, a pair of dikes to do this, because it causes a whole bunch of stress and it's not the right tool for the job. You also do not want to use a pair of needle nose pliers to cut them off with the cutting end here. I don't know if anybody noticed, that's what this is the actual cutting area inside your needle nose. You do not want to also use these because, again, it's not the right tool for the job and it's going to cause a bunch of trouble. Okay, so all these tools, all these things. So let me show you another version of one of my soldering bases. So this is my primary soldering base that I use. So something very important when you're soldering is you want to make sure that you keep your tips clean. So when you look at my soldering tips here, if you notice, I do keep them fairly clean. You can see that there's some shiny solder on the end of the tip. And if you'll notice inside this soldering stand, so this one actually has a built-in sleep functions on it. So if you can see it, whenever I set it in, it puts my base to sleep, and when I lift it out, it heats up instantly, which is one of the reasons that I like to use Hacko, and I like, you know, the higher end stuff. It allows you to do that. Saves your tips. So if you notice inside here, I have this container of brass looking steel wool. What this does is this actually helps to clean your tips off. So the way that you use that is your iron is hot, and you'll probably have seen in my videos at the same time too, as you take out my iron, you can see me go off camera and do something off the side and then come back. Well, that's what I'm doing, is I'm actually taking it, and you just stab it in here like so. You can get a good view of it here. You just stab it straight in when it's hot and on, and it'll clean your tip. And you do that every so often to keep your tip clean, and it helps keep your tips last and lets them survive a little bit longer. So these are special tips, and I can show you a little bit about what these tips look like. So here's an assortment of tips. I keep them color coded just to help a little bit of what they are. So how they look, you can see they're pretty used. The interesting thing about these Hacko tips is, traditionally, like with the Weller, you'll notice that the Weller soldering iron has its tip in here. You know, they look similar. We come down here, they look very similar. But what's different about these is the Weller has your heating element and cartridge inside this base here. So when you take your tips off by unscrewing it and pulling it out, you can see all it is just a little tip. So you're probably used to seeing them like this. If you were to unscrew this handle, the actual heating element is inside the handle, so it's heating this up and then heating the tip. So that is one common style, and most of your basic soldering stations, some of the Chinese ones you get, the AOE ones that you probably see on eBay, are like that. The nice thing about the Hacko that I use here, and this is an FM2027, which comes on the FX951 base. I think the 888s might have a similar one of this as well, but the actual heating element in here is inside the tip itself, so you can see it's a considerably longer tip. And if you look in here in the microscope view, you can actually see the ceramic heating element, and it actually goes through. And if you look on the side here, you can just make out the two little dots that plug into the actual iron when you plug it in to make an electrical contact. And there's a heating coil inside the actual tip itself, so that helps the tip get hotter much quicker, cool down much quicker, and allows it to maintain a steady source of heat and wattage onto your board, which is what allows you to solder quickly and get, you know, boards with big, like, ground planes, meaning big sections of copper that suck the heat down. The cool thing about these tips and these types of irons is they have a quick change, because, you know, this heat is all in here. I can pull this off, I can set it in the base, and I can grab another one and just pop it right in. And bam, now I just changed my tip style, and I'm ready to go with a whole different new tip style. And again, I can take it out very quickly, put it in, and grab another tip and be right back in business without having to wait for it to cool down. That's the other benefit of having a higher end one. Okay, so that's all fine and great. That helps you to solder, that helps you get things in. You're showing me all the tools and amazing things that you do to solder. I cannot say enough about this. So Amtech, do not buy this stuff off of eBay. If you buy this off of eBay, you're going to get a tube of petroleum jelly or Vaseline or something fake. You will not get real Amtech. Amtech only sells directly, or people buy it and resell it, but most of the time it's fake stuff. For those of you that watch Louis Rossmann on YouTube, he is pretty awesome Mac repair tech. He's got a good show. Do a Google search for him. He has a Rossmann Group store, so if you do a search for the Rossmann Group store, you'll find it. He sells this stuff, and what he does is he buys it in big batches and sells it for a very reasonable price. And this stuff is like gold for getting components on and off of boards. It will help and save you. It is the magic that you see John Hertel and myself do when we surface mount components and how to make those joints look nice and smooth and shiny and clean. This is what you use in order to get that stuff to flow and get that solder to work the way that you want it to work. Very, very important. So what else is there that you use to solder? Well, you also need to desolder at times. So desoldering is done with what's called a desoldering gun. So this desoldering gun here is a Hakko FR301. They aren't very expensive. You can get these for about $250. They are worth every single penny. The amazing thing about these is, again, you can change the tips, and the tips on these, so this is a quick release tip. Basically what this is, it uses a special tool that pops on here that you can pop it on, give it a quick twist, and this end comes off and the tips change. So this is what the tips look like. Put it down inside the thing, sir. You can get an idea of it. So it's basically a hollow cone with a hole through the center of it. This one is bad, but it's got a hole through the center of it. And what this does is, as you're heating something, so let's say for example I wanted to remove this capacitor off of this board that was on here, and it was through here, and the leads were cut. Basically you would take this soldering sucker over the lead, so in this case it will actually fit. And again, these shouldn't be this long, obviously, but you put it on here. You do not touch the board. You actually want to just hover just above where the solder would be. You pull the trigger, and you'll hear it here in a sec. Pull the trigger, and it gives you a nice vacuum that sucks the solder out and puts it into this little storage container here. So if I take this here, so I can pop it off, and inside here, pretty cool little thing is where it keeps all of the solder. Keeps in this well. It's got a filter in it that keeps all the crap from getting into the motor and the suction, and you can change these out. Pops right back in just like so. Very simple. Worth every single penny. And again, these take some practice to get used to. You can buy cheap ones. You will see these on eBay as well. They make some cheap ones. Some of the guys have better luck with them. I have not. I can give you an idea. So when I first started doing desoldering, I actually bought this, which is this AOE one that sits off camera now, as you saw. And if you look at it, it's similar to that other one. Looks a lot like it. This thing, first off, has to be cold in order to get the tip out. But you'll notice this thing has this weird long tip. Not the same. It is garbage. It is a clone of an older version of a Hakko. Never got this thing to work right. It would constantly clog on me. I hated it, and it only cost like $100 or $150, but in the end, as much work as I had to do with it, and fighting it, when I bought the Hakko one, no issues whatsoever. So someone asks if I turn the station off before you pull them out. For these, no, you do not need to turn it off to pull them out. You can actually quick release this. Same thing with my other ones. So I'll actually show you real fast here. Doing that. That's a good point. So I just turned on my base station. You'll hear it beep in a minute. As it comes up to temperature. So if you guys heard the beep, so it just beeped. So if you listen, if you pop this thing out, it's gonna freak. So I get an error on my station and then pop it back in and it beeped again. So that's how you know that it's working, and clean it up. So you don't have to turn it off. You can swap them out. It's fine. Some people do turn them off. I don't. The FR301, the solder vacuum, the desoldering gun, you can pop them out hot as well, and they're meant to do that. So another very common tool that I like to use is sometimes I like to, build stuff, obviously. So this is pretty awesome, actually. So this is a open source solder paste, and I use it for flux. This particular one, it uses a little electric stepper motor in here. You hold on to it and put a USB plug in here, and this will actually dispense solder paste for you. And you can go, if this were a surface mount board, for example, you would undo this, and if you notice on this one, this is a manual. You take the needle off, pop it on here. So just for the sake of pretending, helps you get through, and it'll dispense solder paste or flux. Pretty awesome. And again, these things are a lot of fun. This is an open source one. I 3D printed it and they soldered together. You can buy these from the guy that makes them fully assembled. I think it's My DIY Store. You can do a Google search for him for electric, My DIY Store. He pops up. He's got a Facebook page too. But very cool. Okay, so we've soldered, we've desoldered, and again, I'll show you a couple of my tips getting back. I don't mean to be jumping all over the place here, but I want to do it. So this is my general purpose normal soldering iron that I always use. A lot of you guys have probably seen my micro parallel removers, Hacko likes to call them. These are a lifesaver for doing decaps. So they work just like tweezers. They're very small. They get in. They also have tips. So here are the tips for them. Gives you an idea of the size difference between these tips. As you can see how small they are compared to the full size ones. Quite a bit of a difference. These come out very similar to the other ones. They just pop out. Also, the cartridge is in the tip. You can pop them back in. So they come in pairs. These are expensive, and you have to use a high-end soldering station. So currently the FM203 is the lowest cost base station that these parallel removers will work with, and these will run you about $250 with no tips, and the base station itself you can find them on sale for $300. So you're talking a lot of money. You get what you pay for in these as well. Do not buy the cheap big ones you see on eBay. Even though they say Hacko, some of them they're not. They are not Hacko. They are garbage. You will destroy pads using them. You are much better off using hot air, which I will show you in a moment. Do not buy the cheap ones. And you will see these things don't get faked. You don't find counterfeit ones of them just because of how difficult it is to make these things. But they are worth it. And the tips are expensive. These tips run about $40 for the pair. So you can see here's a different style. So these ones are sort of a flat head screwdriver-ish sort of looking style. The ones that I use in here right now are the ones that I most commonly use. They're a finer tip one. They have, these are what they look like, the ones that are in now, same ones. Gives you an idea, example. And then they have another sort of chisel tip that are a little bit narrower than the first ones. These work good for larger. And for when you're working on really, really tiny stuff, I have my micro pencil, which this also works with the same base stations that this one will work with. This is an FM 2032. These are a little expensive. They run about $250, and again, no tips, and like very similar. They use a micro tip that has the cartridge built into it as well. Plugs in. Funnily, that thing I discovered is these tips actually will fit in here, and they work. You can do that, but the angles are wrong, so they really don't. They're not practical, but they do work. And again, I have all of those off to the side with my base stations for easy to use. Another very important little item. So you don't have to invest all the money into buying a big, expensive desoldering gun. If you're only going to desolder a couple of items, you can use something like this. So this is a solder sucker. Another very common one that you can see is this one here, which is a soda pullet. So you probably see a lot of these online. And then this is just another cheapy one that I got. And these work very simple. You basically pop it down. There's a plunger inside here. You push the button and it pops out and causes a vacuum. Now, in order to do this, you have to get right up on what you're going to pull out, and you have your soldering iron on. If you notice, this is a silicone tip on here on this particular one, so it doesn't melt, like at least not quickly. So you'll have your soldering iron on here. You'll have molten solder. You'll get this right up on it, pop it off, and it takes some practice, but you basically would just put it on there like so, and it will suck the solder out, and you just pop that every time. Now the solder stays inside, so when you pop it out, if you were to look at the end, you can see it better on this one. When you push this out, you can see it'll actually protrude, and then it'll push the solder back out. So this one is a very heavy duty one, and you can tell the difference. It will sound a lot louder, but it sucks the solder out very well. It has the similar type of tips as that other one does. These are all replaceable. You unscrew the end here, and you can buy these tips. This one I got off of eBay, like way back when. It's very cheap, but again, these tips are replaceable. You just unscrew it. You can see the spring inside, and you would end up just replacing this whole thing. You actually see some solder in there. Nothing fancy about them. They work really well. You want to put flux down, and you want to just move along every time. There you go. You just saw it eject. Pops it right out. Again, you get what you pay for. Cheap, pretty decent, not super expensive, but fairly good. So maybe $5 for this one, maybe $15, $20 for this one. Same with this, about $10, $15. Again, solder pumps is what they're called, a desoldering pump. This one I use quite a bit if I'm just doing one or two quick things. Another important item, Captain tape. So Captain tape is a heat resistant tape. You probably have seen it. It looks copperish, sort of. Basically, what you're going to use this for is if you're soldering an item down, you want to put some of this down. Helps to secure things in place. Helps to protect things. Now, you will still melt components if your soldering iron touches this stuff and is on there. It won't. It's not a heat shield. It just helps to protect it a little bit from the heat. So you're going to want to definitely have something like that. Another very good tool. So helping hands. With a microscope on it, it will helps you grab wires. On this one, you notice I put some electrical tape on here. So the reason that I do that is it helps with if I'm soldering a wire, keeps it from breaking it. Pretty handy. Another version of that would be something like this. So this just opens up. This is for doing battery connectors in RC cars. And it's pretty nice if you look in here. It's got all these different compartments, so the different sizes of batteries and different terminals. You can actually put them in all these holes, and it'll grab a hold of it. Or actual straight wires, a pair of wires, put them together, close them up. Good stuff. Use those quite a bit. So that is a rundown of the basic tools. Well, actually, let me get a couple other things. Dental picks, also important. Helps you to scratch a little bit of the surface of things. Helps with corrosion a little bit. Also helps to break off the solder mask, which is the green you see on here, which solder does not stick to. Helps you to scrape that off if you were to say you want to fix this trace or something like that. This end of them, a lot of people often wonder, sharp end. Some people don't really quite ever notice what these ends are for. If you notice, it has a little groove in it. I actually like to show that off to some people. So I'll actually pull something out here. You're like, kickstart chip. You're like, oh crap, I just bent the leg of my kickstart chip. What do I do? Oh, woe is me. Well, these ends actually, the reason they have those slots in there is so that you can grab a hold of it, bring it back up, and hey, look at that, I just fixed the leg of my chip. So, super cheap, super handy. A couple other important items. Chip pullers. This is a very common one that a lot of people see. It's another common one that a lot of people see. These are for PLCC. So for Agnes chips, you would put them in the corners. And this is a adjustable type one. They're not very good, but you would basically pop that in, give it a squeeze, and if you notice when you squeeze it, it would draw back in. Helps you pull the chip out. So you put it into the two corners, pop it in place, set it down, give it a squeeze, and pulls it out. These are for pulling 68040s, 68060s. They look like little combs. So let's see. Trying to find one here that, let's say for example you wanted to pull the CPU off of here. You don't want to just grab it. This is not a chip puller. This is a flathead screwdriver. You do not shove it into the side here like this and start jamming it in to get it out. These, if you notice, have teeth on them. They go in just like so. You pop them in place and you give it a little pop. The reason that I have two of them is I like to put them on each side, give them a little pop, safely removes it. So that's a different style. And the more expensive version of these looks like this. This is a one size, so this is just for like a Buster chip from an A4000 or an Agnes, same size. And they're very similar if you look at them. The ends look very similar, except this one only fits one size. It's not adjustable. It only goes up and down. So you'll notice that's it, just up and down. And it works the same way. You pop it in, squeeze it, and it pops them out. Just much more robust. I destroy chips with these things. I hate them. Not really soldering tools, but tools that you need for soldering. Okay, so that is the bulk of the basic set of tools that you need, besides a pair of wire snip cutters. Solder, we went over that. We showed you solder. I have mine on a spool that I can pull out, and I pull it out, hold it in my hand as I'm soldering. I'm sure you guys have all seen me do it. Feed it in. So if you guys have some questions, you want me to cover some things, we'll spend like the next 10 minutes or so. Go ahead and go into the Discord, and we can talk a little bit about anything that I didn't cover. I know I went over a lot of stuff. Again, this first one is just basic, and I just wanted to show you some of the basic tools you need. If you don't need expensive stuff, like I said, just capping back, the Weller that I showed you is perfectly fine. I showed you a couple of different versions of solder suckers that aren't expensive, so that you can go, and then I showed you the gun. The solder itself, you want to make sure you don't buy any cheap Chinese crap. You want to actually use good solder. The stuff that I linked is really good. So I also had mentioned Kester. Kester's good. Another good brand that you can use if you don't want to use Kester, and a lot of people have probably see this brand as well, is the MG Chemical stuff. So this is actually really, really good stuff as well. You can get this off of Amazon. You can buy it in tubes. You can buy it in smaller size. You don't need a big 1 pound roll. This would probably last somebody not doing things for a year. Just to give you an example, here's another size of MG Chemical that is in a smaller roll. So we have a 1 pound roll, and we have basically a ½ pound roll here for this one. Oh, I will show you guys a couple other things as well that I should have covered. Bodge wires or patch wires. So this is solid copper wire. Some of you guys have seen it. Use your wire snippers to get it off. This is good for, so what this is 26 gauge, so it's pretty fine. This is what's called wire wrapping wire, and this is 30 gauge of wire wrapping wire, which is very, very thin. If you can see here in the microscope section, gives you an example of the two together, just to show you how thin the differences are. This is got an insulator on it, just like this does. So it gives you, it's basically half the size. You'll probably have seen a lot of that stuff that I've done. Besides that, you also have some 34 gauge enamel wire. So this stuff is very, very thin too. The nice thing about this is you just scrape the end off of it. It's got an enamel coating that is insulated, that won't conduct until you sand the very edge off. Then you can solder it, and you can use this for jumper wires too. Really good stuff. This is from Remington. You can get this from the Rossman Group store as well. Really cheap. And this literally will last a lifetime. This roll, I've had this roll forever. It will never go away. Okay, so I am now monitoring in Discord, and I will answer any questions and show you anything that you guys need to see. We have Dale's asking for temps. So that, and I didn't, speaking of temps, I do want to show one more thing. So this is a hot air nozzle. So another very important thing. Again, these kind of are as well, you get what you pay for. And this is a way a lot of people decap stuff. And you can buy different size nozzles. So let me show you a couple examples. So here's a couple example of hot air nozzles that I use quite a bit. This one is really nice for decapping. Some people have never seen these before. They're pretty handy. Again, in the microscope view you can see it. So it actually has two nozzles. And the cool thing about this one is it's adjustable. If you look, you can see the screw on there. You take your screw, loosen it up, and you can swing these closer or further apart, and helps to decap quite nicely. I've gotten to the point now where I don't need to use something like that very often, but it is handy, and I use them when I started off. And then again, you have different sizes. So very small size to very big sizes. These are for doing chips. So you would actually put this on and you would hold it over the top of a chip and heat up a chip, and it gets hot from all four sides. And it keeps the center from getting hot, so all you're heating is just the solder portion of the legs of the chip. Again, this is like an Agnes size one. This is for, usually I use these for the sockets on a 3630 or 3640, 3660s. So the helps with the soldering PLCC chips. Good stuff. And one last thing I would like to show you guys before I start taking questions from you and talking about temps and all that type of stuff. So hang on just a sec. The last thing is, how do you see? And this is how you see. So this is my mirror. I love this thing. Anytime I solder, I am underneath it. Awesome magnifier. It's an arm. It clamps onto my desk and get it up out of the way. Very good stuff. So there we go. So for sanding the end off, pretty simple, man. Sandpaper. I take it. You just, if this for example was the insulated wire, you just grab a hold of the end of it, just grab it and just do some quick soldering. I'm breaking the solder. Just do a quick rough up, and it'll take it right off. You got to make sure that this takes some practice, obviously. You can also take an X-Acto blade and you can scrape it off with the X-Acto blade, just where you want it at, and then solder it on. You'll know if you got it off because the solder will flow to it and it'll stick. Okay, so questions. The first one we had was Dale asking us about temperatures. So when I'm soldering with my pencils, and again, these aren't soldering irons, these are soldering pencils. I usually keep mine, hang on, let me turn it on just so I can get my settings shown here. I usually have mine set for 750 degrees Fahrenheit. And that's pretty good for just about everything. You want to be right up around in the 650 to 750s, and you'll know which one is proper for you because the solder will melt and it won't like be blobbing up. It'll actually flow nice and smooth. If you're not hot enough, you'll know very quickly. But 750 is actually really good for using the soldering pencils. For desoldering, I use Celsius for that. and I'm usually at about 260 or so is where I start. And I use a preheater. A preheater basically is, you can find them. I'll show you one real quick. So this is my preheater, and basically what this is it's just a hot plate basically, and it gets hot. I set up some soldering, some stands. The board will sit over the top of this, and it heats it up at the bottom, and that helps you to use hot air to get things off. So if you're using hot air, a preheater is actually really handy. I don't use this one very much. And I set the preheater at 200 Celsius and the top at 260. And what that does is just allows you to keep that higher heat off the board for a long period of time. It goes really quickly to bring it up from 200, where it's already sitting at, to 260. And then you use your tweezers or your whatever your pickup tool you're going to use to pop the chips off. So good starting temperature with a pencil is 750 Celsius. That's actually pretty close to, I think, 260s or so. I'm not sure what 750 Fahrenheit is in Celsius. I mix them all up. But yeah. Other questions? So I tell you what, let's make this a little bit more fun. Let's go into. Actually, it won't work. We'll do. Okay, thanks, man. Appreciate it, Dale. 260 is 500 Fahrenheit. So that's for surface mount. Sometimes I have to bump it up a little bit hotter, but 260 is where I usually start at for surface mount. 750 on my iron, and my iron, again, you're touching the iron quickly. It's not anything. So again, this first class was basically the basic tools. The next class is planned is going to be through-hole soldering. I will make a post about that a little later. I'm going to actually go through some techniques of how to solder with the through-hole board, and I'm going to go through a small project and from start to finish on it. So something small like one of these relocator boards, or maybe I'll build one of my Vampire to 2000 adapter boards that a lot of you have seen. And we'll go over some different techniques for through-hole and surface mount soldering. And through-hole is what we're going to primarily focus on for the first course. And I have a whole bunch of different things to do. And I might even actually get the voice chat room in here up so we can actually talk live if you guys want to ask me live questions, if I can get it set up and get my bandwidth back up to a gigabit where it should be instead of 100 megabits where it's sitting at right now. Anybody else have any other questions or want to see anything? Hopefully this was cool. Hopefully it was educational. Alrighty then. Ground strap. Hey, awesome, Dale. That's another good thing. So that's another good thing that I should have brought up from the very beginning. So ground straps. This green thing that you see in all my pictures, that you see in all of my repair shots that I send out, is actually a anti-static soldering mat. And my desk, which if you look under my desk, this white is also a anti-static soldering workstation specifically made for soldering. This whole workbench is a soldering thing, and the bench itself is grounded. And if you look, I have a ground strap attached to here, which is going down to a ground dump for the desk itself. And what that does is that I'm also sitting on a anti-static mat. Right, you can't really see it, but underneath me is an anti-static mat that helps dissipate any static. So the whole point of this mat is when you're working on it, if any static comes through, it's going to send it through the mat and down into the thing. This mat actually has inside of it a grid of wiring to absorb static and bring it down to the ground. So yes, I do use a ground strap. I just don't use it on my wrist. It's on the pad itself, which works the exact same way. It takes it from you to the ground instead of from you through through the item you're soldering. See, my desk is an anti-static desk. So I just cover that. The whole top of my desk is an anti-static desk. It's what's called a 2M workbench. 2M in military and the Navy term is soldering technicians. I actually bought my desk from a military auction. So you could connect it to a power plug. I wouldn't do that. It depends upon where you're from. The way that mine is, I actually have a ground connector. I should show you. My desk actually goes into a ground connector that is a dedicated ground that goes outside into the ground. It goes into like the same place that my lightning rod for the house goes to prevent that. And I have a terminal in the wall behind my desk that my desk plugs into that goes into that. So your wooden desk, Steven, is not a good thing for grounding yourself. The wood obviously does not conduct electricity, so it's going to zap you to whatever you're soldering. So you don't want to do that. In your case, you would need one of these anti-static mats like I'm using, and instead of having the strap go from your mat down to the ground connection in my desk like mine does, you're going to want to connect it to one of the wrist straps. But you need an anti-static mat so that it goes from you to the mat and not you to your item you're soldering. Okay, so I'm just going to type into Discord from now on.